Okay. We're starting a new Chumash, which is very exciting. The Sefer Habanim, the Sefer about the children, and Sefer HaGeula, I think it's called. No, it wasn't. Actually, the Ramban. Yeah. But the Bereshis is called the Sefer HaAvos, so. In any event, one of the key events of Parshas Shemos is the minui of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was makabel his shlichus in Parshas Shemos. And I think it's kedai to visit some of the points here in the minui of Moshe Rabbeinu to understand the uniqueness, or at least to understand a sliver, a tam, a smell of the uniqueness of Moshe Rabbeinu. So one of these stops along the road of the Minoi of Moshe Rabbeinu, which was a lot of back and forth, there's the arichos, it's striking, the arichos and the psukim, the whole process of Moshe Rabbeinu's Minoi, the back and forth, the Shakal V'Tarya with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But part of it was a Maisa with the Nachash. My Rosh Hashiva spoke about this many, many years ago, and it's not something he spoke about often. It's not like in the Sfarim about, it's not something he spoke about often. I'm very, very happy that I was there and I heard it and wrote it down and taught it to Rabbi Woznicki and, had the ability to have it, because it's not, I hope one day it will be, but right now it's not there. In any event, what happened was that Moshe Rabbeinu, as part of in a sense it was an einish, in a sense it was a part of the journey of his minoi, was a maisa with the nachash. Vayomer Elov Hashem mazeh biyodcha vayomer mate. Vayomer hashlichehu arza vayashlichehu arza vayehi lenachash vayonas Moshe mipanov. So Moshe throws the mate down, and the mate turns into a nachash. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, Shlach yodcha. Stretch out your hand, ve'echoiz biznavoi, and hold on to its tail. Vayishlach yodoi vayechazek boi, vayehi lemata bechapoi. Moshe stretches out his hand and grabs it, and it becomes a mata in his palm. There's three ha'aras here. The first thing is that we're in the middle of a conversation between Moshe and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Vayomer hashlichehu arza. Who said it? The Rabbi Shalom said it. And yet, when Hashem told Moshe, Shlach Yodcha, it's Vayomer Hashem El Moshe, in the middle of the conversation. It's unusual. It could have just been Vayomer El Moshe, or Vayomer again. But why did he have to say Vayomer, why did he have to say Vayomer Hashem El Moshe? Why are we introducing Hashem again? Aleph, Beis. The Lashon HaPasuk is Shlach Yodcha ve'echoiz biznavoi. Grab onto its tail. If you were going to respond appropriately to that, it would say that Moshe listened, Vayoichaz biznavoi. Right? It would say, Vayishlach yodei Vayoichaz biznavoi. Because he said, Echoiz biznavoi, but that's not what it says. Hashem told him, Echoiz, Shlach yodcha ve'echoiz biznavoi. The pasuk says, "Vayishlach yodai vayechazek boi." Why the shinoi? Why the shinoi from echoiz biznavai to vayechazek boi? And finally, it already said that he stretched out his hand. What's the point of saying that it became a mata in his hand? If it became a mata in his hand, it was in his hand. He was saying that's why he picked it up. Okay. In the end of Parshas Shemos is the kasha of Moshe Rabbeinu on HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For this kasha, Moshe Rabbeinu gets starka musar. Hashem was diber itoi kashes. In the beginning of Parshas Va'era. Vayidaber elikim el Moshe. Diber itoi mishpat. Rashi says in the beginning of Parshas Va'era. Because he asked, Lama harei oisa la'am hazeh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when he responded to Moshe, we'll get to the question in a minute, when he responded with Mishpah to Moshe, he said to Moshe, "Va'era el Avram el Yitzchak el Yaakov b'kel shakai u'shmi Hashem lo noidati lohem." And Rashi brings the lashon of the Medrash, "Chaval al da'avdin v'lo mishtachrin." Woe on those that were lost and are not found. Meaning Hashem, like almost saying, like I missed the Avos. The Avos wouldn't have been nichshal here. Such a statement. What did Moshe Rabbeinu say? So as we know, Moshe Rabbeinu went to Paroi, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu was mitzaveh him to, and instead of Paroi sending out Klal Yisrael, Paroi, not only did Paroi not listen to the request of Moshe Rabbeinu, but he made things worse. And Taka Moshe Rabbeinu comes to Hashem and says, Lama harei oisa la'am hazeh. Why did you do bad? Lashon Ra. Lama harei oisa la'am hazeh. Lama zeh shalachtani. Why did you send me? Zokt Rashi. Lama harei oisa la'am hazeh. Rashi turns what sounds like two questions into one question. Why did you do bad to this nation? Why did you send me? So Rashi is mefarish. Rashi says, Lama harei oisa la'am hazeh v'im taimar, and if you'll say ma ichpas lach, why is it your concern? I'm taking care of the world. I got this. Why is it your concern? My concern is kaivelani al shilachtani, al shashilachtani. My taina is, why did you send me? So the Rashi took what sounds bepashtos as a two-step question, and Rashi makes it into one big question that's like built. Why did you do bad to this nation? And if you're going to say why is it my concern? Why did you send me? The Maral in Gur Aryeh, just to explain the pashtus of the Rashi, Kedarka, he goes into the Oimek Hapshat. The Maral says that why didn't Rashi just be Mefarish Kipshute? That there were two questions here. First of all, why did you do bad to, why are you causing this ra to happen to Klal Yisrael? Also, what was the point of sending me if nothing's going to come from it? Says the Maral, if that was the way it was, the two questions, it's in the wrong order. The first question is, what's the point of sending me? Nothing happened. And the second question is, V'loi zu avzu, nishnar dem, but lama harayisa. Says the Maral that because the pasuk says it the other way around, Rashi understood that the nekuda here was lama zeh shelachtani. But still, we have to understand what that meant. Rashiva told us a yisoid over here by this Indian, that whenever, it's a very important thing to know, it's very helpful to know, that when you're learning Chumash and you see in Chumash that there's a taina, someone does something wrong, Moshe Rabbeinu had it a few times, that someone does something wrong, they're not random wrong things. When someone does something wrong, that means it's something in their midah. It has to do with their mission, their midah. It's not like stam random and all. They also mizman kriyashma. It's not like that. When the Torah says a taina on one of the Ishei HaTanach was his lashon, so that means that there's what to learn even from the taina about what this person's tafkid was. So let's try to understand what that is. I want to go to a Nefesh HaChaim that's a very, very, very yisaidistic Nefesh HaChaim. It's way above our hasaga to understand it b'shleimus, but that doesn't excuse us from trying to learn it and to understand it. The Nefesh HaChaim in Shar Gimel goes through the yisaid that although we live in a world that there seems to be many, many different kaichos, good kaichos, bad kaichos, kaichos that are misnage to each other. There seems to be many different forces in the world of nature, in the world of people. There seem to be many different forces and many different things pulling in many different directions. All of that is a facade. And it's not emes. The emes is emes malkeinu, efes zulasa. There are no kaichos, there are none. There's nothing, there's no hisnagdas, there's no taiv and ra. It's all 100% HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, when the Nefesh HaChaim said this, he said a segula nifla. It's very well known that I'll read to you. It's like well known, but it's good to hear it from the source itself. About a person living this way. Now, I want to point out that to me it's a very, very big chizuk that the Nefesh HaChaim takes this yisoid, which is a very derhaibin idea, and we'll see how derhaibin it is in a minute. And he says, you can try to work on this. It's very meaningful. That's what he says in Perek Yud Beis of Shar Gimel. The Mesilas Yesharim says, "Ube'emes hu inyan gadol usgula nifla'a." For a person who wants to be mevatel the ritzainos of others, or dinim that are coming upon him, that they shouldn't be able to be shoyled in him, and they shouldn't be able to make a roishim upon him, that when a person is kaiveya belibay, a person established his belibay, haloi Hashem hu ha'elokim ha'amiti, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's emes. The einoid milvadoi. Shum koyach ba'adam. There's not a koyach, there's not a pull, there's nothing else besides for the Ratzon Hashem in the world. V'hakol molei rak achdusai hapashat yisborach shvay. It's simple. Simple, because there's only one. There's only one koyach in the world, and that's the Rabbi Sonnenschein. And a person, this is an avodah, a lifetime of avodah, but a person is mevatel belibay bitul gomor. With an absolute bittul, a person is mevatel, and he's not mashgiach, he pays no attention to any other kayach or any other ratzin besides for his responsibility to the Bayrei Olam, and he's mishabed umedabek toyhar machshavtoi, the purity of his thought, only on HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that memela, all of the kaychais and ritzainos shaba olam will be nizbatel, that they won't be able to be pile on him at all. So this is haloi davar hu, that the Rabbi Chaim is describing a very, very, very high madrega. We know that there were tzaddikim that did this in times of great sakana and were nitzel in a way that was l'mayla miderach hateva. But it's something for us to work on, to recognize when there's a struggle, when there's a difficulty, when there's a nisayon, when there's a pachad, to recognize there's only the Rabbeinu Shalom. That's my concern. I have one concern, and that is the Rabbeinu Shalom. That's my concern. Otherwise, there's nothing else to be worried about. Says the Nefesh HaChaim, going on to Perek Yud Gimel, that this was the life's work of the Avos HaKadoshim. To live in a world that seemed to be so full of hisnagdus to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the different nisyonos of each one of the Avos, the Zehoya Inyan Avodas HaAvos Kol Yemehem, to work, to create in a world of Hester, an absolute 100% clarity that there's nothing. So Avram Avinu goes to fight the Arba Malachim. There's nothing. I'm not fighting anyone. There's nothing, and so on and so on. And with every avodah, for Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, each conflict, each nisayon, each difficulty, each sakana, that there's only Hashem. Einoid Milvad. There's only HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Says the Nefesh HaChaim, this is what's going on at the beginning of Parshas Va'era. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, you didn't trust me. You didn't trust my absolute act, that there's nothing else going on. There's nothing to be fit. This is all biyadi. Va'era el Avram el Yitzchak ve'el Yaakov bekel shaka ushmi havaya ushmi Hashem lo naidati lehem. He says the Shem havaya, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, represents that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Bal HaKoiches, the Hashem Echad, the Hashem Echad. That's why Hashem havaya is Haya Hayve V'Yiyah. It's all the entire Bria completely. Hashem is the Bayrei and in charge of everything. Hashem says, wasn't megala myself to them with that name. It doesn't mean they didn't know it. But that's not the midah I was megala. I was megala themselves with the name Elokim. Elokim means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Baal HaKoiches Kulam, but in the sense of, in this world, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the shirish of the power, but not the clarity of it. It's the fact of it, but not the clarity of it. So that's what he says, that the Avos always spoke about Elokim because they worked to establish that all these kaichais that I see, they're really all HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They saw other kaichais, but their avodah, kol yameim, was to say, that's Hashem, that's Hashem, that's Hashem. They didn't see that it was Hashem. But that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is being Tevei Moshe, even though they didn't see it. Ushmi Avaya Lo Noidati Lem. They didn't see that I'm the Hashem, Ani Rishon, Vani Achron. That's not what they saw. But with their emunah and with their avodah, they were able to come to a place where they realized, at least b'yidiyasam, they realized that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was the shayrish of everything, and that was the avodah of the avos. That's our legacy, and that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu was being tayveya Moshe Rabbeinu, chaval al da'avdin v'loy mishtakrin.
How do you miss it?
Oh. So Nefesh HaChaim, it's not just that. It goes even further than that. It says the Nefesh HaChaim, Moshe Rabbeinu's madrega was different. That was not the avodah of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu had a different avodah. Omnam madregas Moshe Rabbeinu hoisa oid yoser gavaya. Even though the avos, their avodah was that even though they can't see the presence of Hashem with full clarity, they're maimin in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the godless. They have that emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They trust that everything comes from Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu's madrega was much higher. It was oid yoser gavaya. Was higher than that. Moshe Rabbeinu, and I'm going to show you this in various parshiyos in the Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu lived in a world where he did not have this nisayon. Moshe Rabbeinu lived in a world where it was 100% clear to him, like I'm looking at you now, that the Rebbeinu Shalom is running the world. There was no suffix, there was no doubt, there was no lack of clarity that the Rebbeinu Shalom is running the world. This is why the Nefesh HaChaim says in other places why Moshe Rabbeinu could get nevuah anywhere. There was never a challenge to him being able to access Kedusha. B'chol beisi ne'amonhu. That's the madrega of Moshe. He doesn't have to be meichin himself for nevuah, because he was always there. He was always with full clarity, as if he was looking ba'aspaklaria ha'me'ira, as if kaviyachal he was looking at HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If you're looking at HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're not really worried about anything else. Moshe Rabbeinu lived his life on that madrega, and that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's what it means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was nesiaches to Moshe Rabbeinu with the Shem Havaya. It's always vayedaber Havaya el Moshe Leimer. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's connection to Moshe Rabbeinu was Moshe Rabbeinu stood on Har Sinai. Moshe Rabbeinu was the sarsar, was the intermediary between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael. Moshe Rabbeinu saw everything. There is like come Navi b'Yisrael ke Moshe. Moshe had a madrega that no human being had. The closest person to Moshe Rabbeinu was Adam Rishon Kaidem Achet. There was Moshe Rabbeinu was a madrega that was unsurpassed in the history of Klal Yisrael in this way, that it was with absolute complete clarity. I'll give you two examples. One of them is brought here in the Nefesh HaChaim. One of them is brought in the Ruach Chaim, in the very beginning of the Sefer. It's like unbelievable. It's kedai to learn it. In the Nefesh HaChaim, he brings that Chazal say that that Moshe Rabbeinu was greater than the Avos. Godol shenemar b'Moshe v'Aaron yoser mima shenemar b'Avram, because by Avram said, Anochi offer va'efer. I'm nothing compared to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'm dust, I'm ashes compared to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Moshe Rabbeinu was with Aaron then. He addresses a little bit how Aaron got in there, but Moshe and Aaron said, V'nachnu ma. V'nachnu ma is nothing. Offer va'efer is epis something. Says the Nefesh HaChaim, the others reached a point that they were left with only a thin veil of Olam Hazeh till their hakara that everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Seif Kol Seif, there was still a thin veil. They were in this world. But Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron, the Nefesh HaChaim says, was schlepped together with Moshe Rabbeinu. It was v'nachnu ma. I'm not here. There's nothing. I'm completely aware of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's Malich ala Aretz Kavodai. That everything is part of his Ratzon. That there's nothing that's Kaveya Makom besides for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's V'nachnu Ma. The Ruach Chaim points out that when it says I wanted to double check this to make sure that it's taka. But from what I recall, you could look it up to see if I'm right. But from what I remember, that when it says Avram, there's a psik between the two Avrams. But when it says Moshe, there's no psik between the two Moshes. And the reason for that, he says, is that Avram is like the Avram Shel Mata and his Shirish Lamaila. And because he was in this world, there was a psik. There's some separation. But Moshe Rabbeinu was Moshe. It's nothing. The Moshe Lamaila, the Moshe Lamata was all one. And therefore there was no psik in between. That's the unbelievable madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's go back to the Nachash now. The Nachash was one of the moments that Moshe Rabbeinu learned his kayach, that there's no hisnagdus, that he's completely, he's a shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's no hisnagdus, there's no ra, there's no threat, there's nothing. He's with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem controls everything. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes a nachash. Moshe recognizes a nachash. A nachash represents everything that's evil in the world. So the shayrish hara ba'olam is the nachash. He's the first Ra, and he's the source of Ra, and the nachash. Moshe Rabbeinu understood the meaning of a nachash. So vayonos Moshe mipanav. Moshe ran away. We keep away from bad things. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe Havaya Haya Hayve V'Yiyeh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who reveals himself to Moshe with the clarity of him being in full control, the clarity, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Moshe, Shlach yadcha ve'echoiz biznavai. I want you to reach out and grab onto its tail. Moshe Rabbeinu understands that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying is, the nachash is also mine. The other kaychas in the world, they're all mine. They're all mine, and Mamil, they're all in your hands. So, vayishlach yadai vayechazek boy. It wasn't just that he grabbed the tail. Avad, if Hashem told him to grab the tail, he probably grabbed the tail. But the pasuk is describing this is what Rabbi Sonnenschein said. The pasuk is describing what he was taka doing then. You ever heard this? It's amazing, no? What he was taka doing then. Vayishlach yadai vayechazek boy. He took control over it. That was a moment when Moshe Rabbeinu, there's no longer Ra in the world. Vayehi lemata b'chapoi. In his hands, under his control, that's the hadgasha of b'chapoi, it became lifeless. It became meaningless. It became dry. It became nothing. Vayehi lemata b'chapoi. Pilei ploim. Moshe Rabbeinu then turns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when something bad happens to Klal Yisrael, and this is the way that the Rosh Yeshiva explained what his kasha was. When you said, why didn't he get it? He says, no, he did get it. He didn't understand why he was the shliach for this. There was Hester Panim here. It was not going the right way. Moshe was saying, I understand that sometimes there's Harayaysa la'am hazeh, but lama zeh shelachtani. Why is this me? And that the Rebbe Shalom said, oh, yeah, you're on a very high madrega. You're the das of Klal Yisrael, but you're not allowed to ask questions. Chaval al da'avdin, the others that had to work, they didn't see with such clarity. And they had to work on it and steig to get there. But Rabbi Yosef, you asked about why didn't he get it. It was dafka mipnei ma'alasei. That he was like, I thought my job is to be the one that's malei das and umala ha'aretz day. I thought that was my makom. Lama zeh shilachtani. What I don't know is, what was taka the hashgacha there that Moshe should be the shliach? I don't know what the answer was. Moshe didn't know the answer either. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu's response to Moshe was, yes, this is your job. You're going to be the one of das, but you don't have to understand everything. Lama zeh shilachtani. Why are you sending me? We find, once we're doing this, we did this a little bit last week about bringing some parshiyas together. Let's do it this week. So we find in a few weeks that Amalek attacks. And Moshe Rabbeinu sends Yeshua to fight Amalek. But really, the shirish of the Nitzachon is from Moshe Alein, because Moshe Rabbeinu uses his hands to inspire Klal Yisrael to think about Hashem. Moshe lifts his hands up, Kasher Yorim Moshe es Yadai v'Gavar Yisrael. And when he was not Yorim Yadai, it was v'Gavar Amalek. Sakti Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, right? V'chi Yadav shal Moshe oisais milchama, oishayvreis milchama, elaloi marlach, kol zman shehayu Yisrael, mistaklim klape mailo, meshabdim es libam laviam shabashamayim, then they were menatzeach, ve'im lav hayu noiflim. So we've talked about this before, about kedai to be mechaber to this inyan. You think, like, I tell you there's a Rabbanu Shalom, and if I put my hands down, you forget? Is that how we live? What does that mean? What's the meaning of that? But the teretz is a davar nifla. The teretz is a davar nifla. We know, for example, that the pasuk says, "Va'ata Yisrael ma Hashem alekecha shayil me'imach ki im liyira." Right. So the Mishnah, the pasuk when Moshe Rabbeinu told Klal Yisrael, makes it sound like, what is the big deal? All Hashem is saying that you should have Yirah Shamayim. So then the Gemara in Brachas Taka asks, "V'chi Yirah milsa zutrasahi," and the Gemara answers, "In legabe Moshe milsa zutrasahi." For Moshe, it's easy. Let's say this in two layers. Layer number one, first of all, this is mamish the nefesh HaChaim. Because Yira, what's the nisayon of Yira? That even though I can't see Hashem, I'm shivisi Hashem lenegdi tamid, right? Ein yeshivasei shel adam u'tenuaisa v'hu lefnei melech gadol ki yeshivasei v'hu bebeisei, right? The Ramah b'shem the Moreh Nevuchim in the beginning of Shulchan Aruch. Because I don't see HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But for Moshe Rabbeinu, it's a milsa zutras. It's not his nisayon. He lives with the reality. He's the ish hadas. He's the nachnu ma. He sees with clarity. There's no nisayon of not having Yirah Shamayim when you're sitting with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's no such nisayon. But even more than that is that the Gedolei HaMefarshim have said that legabe Moshe doesn't mean for Moshe it's a milsa zutrasa, because to say that for Moshe it's a milsa zutrasa doesn't explain why Moshe said that to Klal Yisrael. Right? If you've ever had the opportunity to teach Talmidim, you know that you can't teach them on your level. You have to teach them on their level. So why would Moshe tell Klal Yisrael what's the big deal with Yira? Because it's easy for him. It's unfair. No, say the Mefarshim, legabe Moshe means when you're with Moshe. And this is a very Yisayidistic thing. It's negeh to us till today. Moshe Rabbeinu had a madrega that he mamish had a complete hasaga that Hashem hu Elokim ve'ein oid milvadoi, with absolute clarity. But that wasn't a madrega that stayed with Moshe. Anyone who was mechaber himself to Moshe was able to get a tam of that madrega. Okay, it wasn't like Moshe Alein, but was able to be mischaber to that madrega. Amalek is attacking. Is that not the Nachash? Is that not the same Shirish Hara as the Nachash? Amol, when Moshe saw a Nachash, was Vayonas Moshe Mipanav. But Moshe learned, no, Vayechazek boy, Vayehilemate Bechape. Moshe learned there's no Nachash. There's only Eibishter. There's no Nachash. So when Amalek attacked, Moshe, they needed the constant Legabe Moshe. That Moshe lifted up his hands, the constant legabe Moshe. I was medayik many years ago that when Moshe is struggling to keep his hands up, it says B'lashon Rabim. It says V'yedei Moshe kvedim. Because there's two hanhagas, there's Toiv and Ra, there's Yamin and Smile. And it gets confusing. But when he lifts his hands, it says Kasher Yorim, Moshe has Yadai. Because when he lifts up his hands, there's only one midah. There's only the Rebbeinu Shalom. Then it's one midah. That's what Moshe. That's the effect that Moshe Rabbeinu has on Klal Yisrael. You see this somewhere else also. You see this in Parshas Chukas when Moshe makes a saraf. Right, there are nechashim that are killing Yidden, and the pasuk says, "Asei lecha saraf," make for yourself a nachash, and whoever was nashuch by the nachash will look at the nachash and live. And it's a davar matmiya. The nachash is a dangerous thing, right? They were bit by nachashes, so they should look at a nachash and live. It doesn't make sense. But the Gemara tells us that asei lecha saraf meant that it had to be mima moinoi shel Moshe. It had to come from Moshe's nechasim. To be mima moinoi shel Moshe means that this is shaykh to Moshe's midah. By Moshe's midah, Moshe's being malamed. You were bitten by a nachash, you could also be healed by a nachash, because it's all the Eibishter. There is no nachash. That was the whole point, that the nachash is pointing. The Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah talks about the nachash also. V'chi nachash meimis, a nachash mechaya. The nachash is pointing to the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's asei lecha saraf. That's Moshe Rabbeinu ben nechasav with by himself. That's another type of legabe Moshe milsa zutrasei, that Moshe is being mechazik them to use mamoinoi to create a nachash which is ra and to show them no, it's taif. You see this in other places also, but I think it's enough for tonight to show this midah of Moshe Rabbeinu. But I want to just circle back before we daven Ma'ariv, just to circle back to realize that the Nefesh HaChaim invited us to try to be mischaber with that midah. Moshe is shakol keneged kol Yisrael. There's a lashon in the Gemara that there's a phrase in the Gemara when it's talking about numbers of keflayim ki yotzei Mitzrayim, double yotzei Mitzrayim, and the Mefarshim say double yotzei Mitzrayim is because shakol Moshe keneged kol Yisrael. So there's double 600,000. But there's a message there. The message is that Klal Yisrael is with Moshe. We know through the Dairis, a Talmud Chacham is called Moshe Shapir Kol Amrit, right? A Talmud Chacham is called Moshe. But the Nefesh HaChaim says that you and I, when faced with challenges, when faced with nisyonos, when faced with difficulties, when faced with fear or being unsettled, that there's makom for us to chazer this yesod. It's not just for Moshe. I'm sitting here describing. It's worth it for that alone to describe the madrega of Moshe Rabbeinu. And certainly the Nefesh HaChaim doesn't mean that we become Moshe Rabbeinus. The others weren't Moshe Rabbeinu, and it doesn't mean that we become the others either. But to understand the yesod of Einoid Milvadei, to understand there's nothing. People are afraid of getting sick. People are afraid of jobs. People are afraid of machlokes. People are afraid of children's chinuch. There's so many things that wear us down with different anxieties and different fears and different worries. And the servant of Hashem has to be oiches, the midah of simcha, and to live with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to tell himself every day, I am here to do the mission that the Rebbe Shalom sent me to do. And everything else that the Rebbe Shalom takes care of. Ein oid milvadei. There's nothing, there's no other mechitzas. There's nothing else. So starting Chumash Shemais, Be'ezer Hashem, we'll have an appreciation of our Rebbe of Moshe Rabbeinu, who taught Klal Yisrael in Lagabe Moshe Milsa Zotrasei. Shekayach.
That's not a question. That's it.
Yeah, very good. Very good.